Welcome, welcome. Happy Friday, everybody. Vinaya, what's going on?
Hi,
Howdy.
nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks again for joining, and thanks for some of the people who are tuning in just now. We are streaming on both Facebook and YouTube right now. So we're going to get probably a couple of comments from both. And so if you are on either platform, please feel free to take a moment and tag a friend or tag a support group or share the stream if you can somewhere. That's always really helpful to get more people in to ask questions so that we can get a really good dialogue going. But with that said, Vinaya, welcome. For those who are not familiar with you, or with Galt Advocacy. Do you want to briefly take a moment and share who the heck you are and why you're here today?
Absolutely. I've been with Galt Advocacy since 2021. Prior to that, my degree's in special education. So that was, my original start. And then I went to the regional center and worked at a regional center in California for 9 years in the children's unit for the last 6 or so. And then also with the older adults for the first part of my career at the regional center. So those are my kind of two areas of expertise and the things that I'm most passionate about. So I love to share that with all of you and answer questions any way that I can.
Nice. And I'm glad you're here today because I would love to say I'm passionate about special education. And I'd say I am indirectly a little bit, but that is not my expertise. And so we get questions about the world of education every single week. And so I'm glad that we get to have you on today, Vinaya, and thank you for sharing your experience. For those listening right now, Vinaya is an incredible resource, incredible. She has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. And I'm really happy that she gets to be a part of our team and join us today. So if you have a question related to the world of education, you are welcome to drop that below here in the comments. You're welcome to share a question or a thought, concern, or even just what's going on in your life. So if you have a kiddo, a youngster in school right now, or possibly an adult and you're considering an adult transition program, let us know how we can maybe support you and help you. And so we have Johnny here. I already said hello to you, Johnny. Hello, hello. Thanks for being here. And so we have a good chunk of people here already. And so for those of you who are tuning in again, drop a comment, like, share, tag a friend if you can. We'd love to answer as many questions as we can possible. So Vinaya, before we maybe jump into some questions that we already kind of have lined and queued up, how is school going? I know we just kind of started we're about a month and a half in or so, right? How's it going on your end?
Absolutely. So this is the time of year where, all the kids that transitioned to a new school this year, whether it was a natural transition like junior high or middle school, high school, or the families switched schools, this is when all the 30-day meetings are happening. So that's a lot of the work I'm doing right now is helping families either prepare for a 30-day meeting at school, attend with them, those types of things. Anytime that something new was put into a plan, 30 days is also a great time to check in. It gives everyone time for the child to adjust to either a new classroom or a new protocol, and the teachers to get to know them. So you're past that, the first couple weeks of trying something or being with somebody new could be a bit of an adjustment for anyone. So right now, that's a lot of what I'm doing is helping families do reviews, get ready for those meetings, schedule those meetings, things like that.
Love it. Awesome. And it doesn't highlight here. Let me take the banner down. I edited your name a little bit. Education advocate. Because I want people to know as soon as they enter into this room that we're talking to a professional here who knows her stuff. And so for those of you who don't know, I pretty much all education questions that I have, I'm usually going to Vinaya, usually going to her. And so a lot of people who reach out who are needing some consults or help in that world, she's great. And so hitting the ground running with school a month ago, you mentioned 30-day meetings. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that? So for myself, who doesn't know, is that for everybody with an IEP? Can they all expect like an initial 30-day meeting at the beginning of the year? How does that work?
No, so 30-day meetings are, like I said, anytime there's a natural transition, if you change to school or if you move to a new town and therefore change to school, schools are supposed to hold a meeting and around the 30th day. after school starts. So in that general time frame to check in, how are things going? And especially because an IEP is written specific for your child in the environment that they're in. So in some classrooms, they automatically do certain things depending on what type of special day class or the format of the program, and in other programs, they don't. So your child may need additional accommodations in one program that they don't need in another, and vice versa. So anytime there's something new, a new program that's put into place, if the new school year was starting and now you have an aide, things like that 30-day check-in is really important, and typically is automatically scheduled by the school.
Gotcha. Okay, sweet. We do have a question for you, Miss Vinaya here from Johnny. Hi, our autistic child will be going in from elementary school to middle school. Any tips regarding that transition? Thanks so much. Johnny, is your kiddo on an IEP? Are they in a special day class? If you don't mind sharing, that'd be great. Oh, they furthered their point. Sorry. They said, also, in terms of IEP, will there be an IEP in middle school? Our child is receiving IHSS. Any tips in that area? Cool. Okay. So yeah, back to the original question, Vinaya. What are your thoughts?
If the child is currently on an IEP, then yes, the IEP would transfer over to middle school. In those times where you're transitioning to a new type of program, such as middle school, they should be holding a transition meeting before the end of the school year. The idea of that is you have an IEP team meeting, and you have the current team from elementary school, and you have the new team from the middle school, and the people who have been working with the child share the information with the people who are going to be working with the child. And because as much as I'd like to say that IEP has everything that you need in it, a piece of paper is never going to give you the same feel as having a conversation. And same goes for just being able to ask questions. What do you mean by that? Can you explain how you implemented that? Those types of things are really nice for everyone to get together, especially if the elementary school team worked well with your student. So if they had a successful environment, if your child was thriving in that, you want to make sure that knowledge is transferred over to the new program. I have had families where they just had a terrible experience with one school and were so excited to go to a new one, and didn't care if the one team shared knowledge with another. So unfortunately, that can occasionally be the case. But for the most part, they're really helpful. And in that time, I stress the importance of that. I think that's a very valuable thing, to be able to have your two teams meet together before that shift. It also gives a chance for the IEP to the team to add some things in that might be needed in middle school. And so knowing how does your new program work in middle school? So before the start of the school year, there's maybe some additional accommodations added in that can start with the child. Then you revisit again at that 30-day period, like I said, because it's a transition to a new school, new program. But it's nice to be able to have some of that knowledge up front so you can start with some of those supports. But that, I think, is really important, that meeting, to make that transition successful. That is pending on an IEP already being in place.
Love it. I think that's super helpful, Johnny. Let us know if that's helpful for you. You can expect some adjustments, right? But being on top of it and making sure the conversation is there between those environments, if you feel like that's helpful. I think that's a great idea. It's a great idea. And to further your second question, you said our child's also receiving IHSS. Any tips in that area? Yeah, we can give you lots of tips. That's my specialty. Do you have any questions in particular? I can give out really general tips, but they may not apply. So if you have any specific questions, Johnny, let us know. That'd be great.
And let Caleb know, because just like Caleb defers to me for all education questions, when I get the IHSS questions, I defer to Caleb, because that is not my area of expertise.
All right, we got Kuda. I recently found out 2 weeks ago that my son's social worker is related to us by our culture through marriage. I've met her husband's brother, his ex-wife, new wife. My son's assessment also found out because my sister-in-law, cousin, I did reach out. Okay, so we don't have the whole comment here. Teresa, if you don't mind finding the rest of the comment and posting it, that'd be great. We'll come back to your questions, Kuda. Ruchika Kapoor, hello. Thanks for everything you do. Thank you for being here. My son has Down syndrome and can barely say 3 to 5 words. He is 5 years old, but showing interest in sign language. Can I ask the school to provide or assign an instructor for ASL class? What are your thoughts, Vinaya?
He's 5 years old. Typically, sign language is not a language that the school has supports for. That being said, they can for minimal, but they're going to go more towards that. If you have no language, they're going to go more towards the PEC system, so that picture exchange system, and then potentially an AAC. The reason for that isn't so much that sign language itself isn't beneficial. It's wonderful. However, it's not commonly used or known. So in order for the school to establish this is a language that we're going to work on and continue to further, they want it to be a language that will be able to create an ability for that individual to ask for what they need amongst a larger group of people. And sign language is a smaller group of people, and typically most of the school staff doesn't know sign language. So they'll work on some of those basic, more, eat, those types of things that can be easily learned, but not sign language as your core language. It gets tricky too with a 5-year-old, because if they do have any language, then the school typically wants to continue to work on that verbal language, since that's the seen to be, best is a bad word, but you get the idea that the form of language that they want to pursue if you're capable of it. A lot of times once you get up into first grade, you need a little bit more language to be able to access your education. So if you haven't had a lot of growth at that point, you start adding in those AAC assessments to see if you need an actual device to help communicate.
And Ms. Kapoor did write that he is on the PEC system right now. They have an IEP meeting next week. I'm hoping IET team can come with the resolution. Thank you. We hope so too. And do you as far as tips, I know can be very general, right? Mm-hmm. But at this age, like you said, there is an expectation. If a child has Down syndrome, which is a presumptive disorder, we're going to presume that this child may also be intellectually disabled or have a global developmental delay of some sort. Of course, we don't know. Ms. Kapoor, you're welcome to share as much as you are comfortable with. But the expectation that there may be a speech delay that is paired with that is very, very common for kiddos at this point, right? And so thankfully, the schools can accommodate to that, like Vinaya said. And so what would be some encouragement, Vinaya, that you would share rather than going the sign language route? Not that would be like a negative alternative or not to pursue that. I think sign language, like you said, can be a great asset. But what is maybe like what is something that she can bring into the meeting next week that you feel could be important with highlighting that topic of furthering the speech side of the goals in the IEP?
Yeah, so it sounds like the PEC system's already being used, or some form of picture exchange system. At that point, it really would be discussing, is now an appropriate time to look at an AAC device assessment. So with anything, it's an assessment that has to be done in order to determine the need. In schools, an AAC or communication device is typically an iPad with a language application that's added onto it that the student carries around and uses kind of as their voice. There's a lot of programs that can be put onto it. So it can be basically a digital picture exchange where there's pictures on there that they point to, or phrases they've kind of put together with pictures for the individual, so they know how to get to what it is they want to tell someone. But there's a whole variety of programs. So typically, if language isn't developing enough and the PEC system is still the only method, a lot of times it will be looking at that, is an AAC device appropriate? And that would be a team decision. So going to the IEP meeting and requesting an assessment for that, if that's something that you're ready or wanting to pursue.
And she did mention as well that I don't know if you can see the comment on the screen, how close you are, but she did get he gets speech twice a week, and she's hoping to see some improvement soon. So I don't know if it's right time, right place to ask for more speech therapy or for additional accommodations with speech. I'm not too sure if there's any last point you want to share there.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really hard for me to tell you about what to ask for without actually reviewing an IEP. I don't know how many minutes twice a week that the student gets. Also, a lot of times with a 5-year-old, their attention span isn't very long. And so sometimes certain amounts of minutes have been decided by a team because the child quite literally can't attend for longer than that. So they can only attend for a 15-minute session. Otherwise, the child's running around, or behaviors start to ensue. So, and unless I review the document, review the notes, and have that conversation, it's a little bit difficult to tell you what to request for a specific thing for your child. But we definitely do offer those consultations. So if you want to have a further, deeper review and see, if there's more that needs to be added to goals, or that you would like to see added to goals, you can definitely call and we can go into a more personal dive into your child's IEP.
Love it. Thanks for that add there, that addition, Miss Vinaya. Anybody listening today who does want to get on Vinaya's calendar, you can reach out to the office and book a consult with her if you want to do a little bit of a deeper, more personal dive into your kiddo's IEP. We do have another question from Anna. This is kind of turning into Q&A, which I love. I'm all for it. So we're going to try and get to all your guys' questions. Anna says she's requested an emergency IEP meeting. How long does the school district have to respond?
Typically, they have 15 days. When it comes to an emergency, it's a matter of if they deem it an emergency. Emergency is a little bit up to interpretation. If it's a matter of safety, then that would be considered, an emergency. Otherwise, they have, a certain amount of time to respond, but they have up to 30 days to hold a meeting. And so that emergency IEP meeting, it depends on what it was for. Otherwise, it will just be automatically transferred into an IEP request. And at that point, you have 30 days.
So the two numbers that come to mind, Vinaya, I often hear 15 days and 30 days. Can you share why those numbers are important? And that's also for me too, because I would like to have that information. But I hear that the number of 15 days to respond, 30 days to respond. When is that usually applicable?
Usually that's referring to assessments when you hear the 15 and 30 as far as why that's most common. If you ask a school for an assessment, they have 15 days to respond with an assessment plan. If they disagree or have further questions, then they have up to 30 days to hold a meeting and then make a decision and give you an assessment plan. So if a meeting is needed, they have a 30-day window. If a meeting is not needed and everyone's on the same page, they have 15 days from your request.
Cool. Okay. We do have another question here from Miss MM. Can I request a change school classroom if Aeon is refusing to go or walk into the classroom? We are 4 weeks in and everything was fine until this week when he started protesting.
Kind of. If he is on an IEP, that's a team decision. So most of the time, let's say it's a special day class, a lot of schools don't have more than one special day class that's leveled for the students that you need. So if it's a moderate to severe class or a mild moderate, or some schools have autism specific classrooms or ones that focus more on behaviors or, more on language. So it depends on what the setup is at your particular school and where they have programs and where they have room. It gets a little bit tricky with protesting because they do, if you don't know why the protesting has happened and it's just they're starting to protest, a school could argue, we don't have classrooms that every time a child protests, we change them. It almost continues that behavior per se. They're supposed to look more at why is this student protesting? Is there something in the environment that needs to be shifted? Is there another support that needs to be put in place? Maybe the student needs an aid at the start of the day because transitions are really difficult. And so whatever the reason is, if it's not because something happened per se and there's an actual problem, they would be looking more at, let's hold an IEP team meeting and having a conversation about what needs to be done in order to make that transfer into the classroom successful.
Got it.
And if
Very
the
good.
student isn't going to school, so if I think it's Aeon is your child's name, if it's completely unsuccessful and therefore you're taking him home every day and he's not attending, they would constitute that as an emergency meeting because he has to be in school. So you can't wait 30 days on a child not attending school.
Right, right. And oh, I lost it. Where'd it go? Oh, this is back to Johnny. So Johnny was the one that also had the IHSS question. Regarding the IEP question, I guess how to set up the new middle school IEP team as related to helping with IHSS review each year for our little one. Thanks again. Well, so I guess there's kind of a two-part there, right? So setting up because obviously the IEP and IHSS are two different conversations, right? However, for those who have been in the world of IHSS for a little while, know that the IEP can sometimes play a big role with, something like protective supervision with IHSS. And so, I would say, worldview here or perspective on this is whatever this child needs help with at school, that always is kind of top priority, right? If the IEP is factual and true, then we have to accept how that might affect the IHSS benefit. But as far as how it might help IHSS in a way where you can get additional services with the program, again, you don't want to fabricate anything. You don't want the IEP to look a certain way when it's not true, right? If the child's struggling with X, Y, and Z, they're struggling with X, Y, and Z. And if it's important for the school to highlight those issues, then the school can highlight it in the IEP, right? And so your question is how to set up the new middle school IEP team. So to my understand, you don't necessarily set the team up, right, Vinaya? This is something that the school will have already sort of in place to cater to this child as they do with the rest of the classroom, correct?
Absolutely. So there are certain required members as far as who needs to attend an IEP team meeting. And, there's the mandated, you have the teacher, you have a district representative, you have, an administrator. Sometimes it's from the district, but you have these certain required ones. And then you have the ones that are required because they're your team, your services for your students. So if your student has speech therapy, the speech therapist should be at that annual meeting, those types of things. You don't get to say, I want an additional person because I need it for something else. It's, does your child need that additional person? And so I get a lot of questions that cross over those two worlds, and understandably so. A lot of my job is reviewing documents to make sure that they are accurate because they do get passed on to IHSS. However, because my passion is making sure that your child has the best education possible in their least restrictive environment, and that they have the supports they need to be successful. If we do that based on your child's needs, that's the best you can do for IHSS, for lack of better words, because I can't ask them to write about things that you want in there if it's not happening at school. And if it is happening at school, it should be in the document. So there's a problem if it's not. If there's a support that your child's getting or an accommodation that they give and it's not in that document because they didn't want to write it down or whatnot, well, then that's absolutely something that we need to resolve. But there's definitely times where behaviors show up at school that don't show up at home, or that show up at home and don't show up at school. And some of it, some kids it's the exact opposite, and some the classroom environment is more controlled and predictable. There's the same thing every day at the same time. You have your same place that you sit, you have the same teachers, there's a lot of staff, there's locked doors, there's all that. And for some students, they do really well in that environment, and at home your schedule may be less predictable. You maybe have soccer practice for another child one day, and you have to go to the grocery store the next day, and things bounce around and behaviors show up more frequently at home. So the things that happen at home may be different than at school. If things are happening at school or if supports are in place at school and they're not well documented, then that's where we can really fine tune that to support IHSS. But it's more a matter of, do you have a well-written IEP? Does it really document what is going on at school? Is your child getting the supports that they need at school? And if all of those are in place, then that's the best document you can have for IHSS.
I agree with everything you said, Vinaya. And, as you won't necessarily need to present your IEP every year, Johnny, to IHSS. It's really just when they request it. A lot of people who have protected supervision do oftentimes have to, give the social worker the IEP. They do oftentimes request it annually, biannually, because it is an important document that highlights a lot of the child's growth, progression, and regression, even, right? And so, just any IHSS related tip in that world is it goes hand in hand with what Vinaya said. If everything is looking right on the IEP and the school is taking care of them in a way that you feel is correct, and the way that your advocate or your team feels is correct, then you have to make sure that that is written in a way on the IEP that is helpful for IHSS, if that is again, a goal that you're trying to achieve. But again, that goal has to be starting with is the child getting what they need at school, and is the school accommodating appropriately? That's most important. And if they are, and if those needs reflect the needs of what IHSS can do for this child, then you're in good spot, right? And so if you're getting denials from IHSS or issues from your social worker because of what the IEP says, then you have to look at this IEP and to determine, are they right or are they wrong, right? If there's nothing wrong with the IEP and everything is highlighted there that you want to be highlighted there, and the child just doesn't match the criteria for whatever you're pursuing benefit-wise, then that has everything to do with the benefit, not the IEP, right? But that's a big conversation, and I'm so glad you're here, Johnny. If you're still watching, I think you dropped that comment a little while ago. You are more than welcome to reach out to our office too and chat with us if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. Okay, so back to Teresa. She finished up the comment. She said, I did reach out to IHSS for the conflict of interest, but they're saying they don't know of any conflict of interest, if nothing they can do since the hearing is still pending. Would you call her husband uncle? Okay, so quickly just tap into this because it's IHSS related. So I agree. That's a conflict of interest. You shouldn't have a family member or somebody who's related to the family in some way be your social worker. However, there are some subjective thoughts here. I wish we had Dakota accessible today. Teresa, if you want to throw this question to Dakota or to John, they may be able to help us out a little bit more, because I don't have a regulation that I can pull to support this. But to my understanding, this would fall under one of the areas as to why the social worker probably would not be a good fit for your IHSS case. And so what they can do in situations like this, if they don't have any other available social workers, they can pull a social worker from another county if it's possible. But the hearing is still pending, so I'm guessing you had the assessment. You already had the conversation with the social worker, so you've met with them. They've made a decision on the case which you disagreed with, which is why there's an appeal, or you're appealing to get the new social worker. Let us know what that is, because that, I feel like, might play a big important role into kind of the next steps into this question. Because if you had the assessment with this person and they denied your case, that person should not be testifying in your hearing. There should be a redo assessment. Well, I shouldn't say that. There's a lot of things that can be discussed to help resolve this concern here. But Kuda, if you're still watching, please let us know some more details if you can about how far along you've gotten on the IHSS process side. Did you have that assessment? Have you met with this social worker in person for assessment purposes? I do want to know that. And what is the open appeal about specifically? Is it about a denial, or is it about the issue that you asked? I want to know that. Okay, let's see here. So Ms. Cooper mentions that the speech therapy she was talking about before is 45 minutes twice a week. But yes, I would say get connected with us, Ms. Cooper. I think Vinay would love to learn a little bit more. Oh, she said she'll be in touch. Perfect. Let me see here. Isabel is asking, hi, may I suggest to the IEP team that the goals be every 6 months? Thanks. What are your thoughts on 6 month goals?
No. But you can review them whenever you want. And if they're met at 6 months, you can absolutely suggest new ones are added. So the regulation is for every 12 months, once a year for an annual meeting. The goals are intended to be created so that they would take a year to meet them. So they're supposed to be not so easy that they could be met in a month or two, and not so hard that it's impossible for them to reach that goal. So trying to, get into that good in between to where they do have to put in a good amount of work in order to reach that goal. But the IEPs are put into place annually. You can request a meeting, which is actually, one of the questions that we had a resource on for today about requesting a meeting for your child just to review the IEP, not because you're requesting an assessment, not because, you're due for the annual meeting. You have the ability to do that at any point. You can request a meeting at any point. A goal is appropriate to change if once it's met. So if you create a goal, your child's getting close to it, you should know that because you're getting progress reports. Make sure you're paying attention that you are getting your progress reports. On your IEP, it will mark. It's in later on in most IEPs, or a lot of them are formatted a little bit differently, but there's a box that marks how often progress reports are supposed to be provided. So some it's by semester, some it's trimester. Look at that and make sure you're getting them, because if you're reviewing and it looks like, oh, wow, my child has almost met this goal at the first check-in, absolutely call an IEP meeting. All you have to do is email your case manager, request an IEP meeting, and they have to schedule it within 30 days. And so you can make a request because you want to review the goals and see if new ones need to be added. But you do have the right to do that at any point. If you don't know who your child's case manager is, it's typically the person that's most intimately involved with their special education. So if your child's in a special day class, it's pretty much always the special day class teacher. If your child is in general education, but they get speech services, then it's the speech therapist. But whatever the primary service is, it's always a special day class teacher if that's the classroom setting. But gen ed, it's whatever the primary service provider would be the one carrying the case.
Love it. Okay. Ms. Cooper had I think a clarifying question. I was told 15 days when I had a safety emergency meeting, IEP meeting. My son took off and he was on the highway walking. It was done within 24 hours. I think it depends on what kind of emergency IEP is requested. Thought I'd share. I think that kind of is in line with what you were mentioning a little bit ago about the difference between requesting a meeting versus having kind of like an emergency meeting, right?
Yeah, if it's like I said, if it's a safety risk, that should be held immediately. So I definitely, agree that is the case. And I'm glad to see in your case when that happened that there was a meeting in 24 hours, because that's, everything should stop and everyone else's meetings need to be rescheduled if you're talking about keeping a child safe.
Agreed. Okay, so let me see here. I think we're doing pretty good. There's a couple of people who are, you guys are awesome. I can see, Francis, you're answering some questions for some individuals. I think for Johnny, keep doing that, please. If you guys want to kind of address some of the questions in your own words, that's also really great. Christy said, thank you. She was unaware of progress notes. Danae, do you want to briefly talk a little bit about how progress notes work and like what a parent can maybe expect if they're not familiar with that?
Yeah, so if you look at your child's IEP and you go to one of their goals, it will show lines underneath the goal that say progress report 1, progress report 2, progress report 3. And those should be filled in throughout the year. And so at whatever, it's typically whenever your child usually gets a report card. So if your school gives out 2 report cards a year, then it's typically by semester. And that's when you get the progress reports on the IEP. would typically be they would mark by semester then. If your school does 3 times a year, then typically the progress reports on your IEP for that school would be marked as by trimester, and you would get 3 a year. So if it's a good way to remember, if I got my child's report card and I'm not seeing progress reports, I need to check in, because that's when you should be seeing them. And the idea is, the purpose of that report card that you get, especially in elementary school, they just number things and letter things. And it's just to give you an idea, is my child getting this skill? Progress reports are basically the same idea. They're saying, here's the goal. Are they making movement in the direction of the goal? It's helpful to get throughout the year, because then you can evaluate partway through the year, not wait till a whole year has passed. Is my child making progress? Do we need to come back together? Because if they're not making progress, maybe something needs to change. Maybe they need an additional service. Maybe there's another accommodation that needs to be added, whatever it is. But those progress notes are really important for you to not have to wait for a whole nother year to know, is my child making meaningful progress?
Love it. I do have a question for you, Vinaya, and it's actually a question that I get often, and it's one of our questions here. Where'd it go? Okay. How can I get the school district to evaluate or assess my child? So I have had lots of conversations with parents who have suspicions of autism. They have suspicions of an intellectual disability, and they're having trouble with getting an assessment, or maybe they just don't even know where to go. They might have Kaiser, and a lot of times when you have Kaiser, they'll ask for a recommendation, but it's just kind of a long process. So for somebody who has maybe suspicions that their child may be autistic or has an intellectual disability or some type of condition that's affecting them academically, what would your advice or encouragement be for that person with school related? I guess is part of the conversation here.
Yeah, no problem. So first thing I'll have, Teresa can post down here, as far as I put up a document on how can I get a school district to evaluate or assess my child. That gives you the basics of it. There's even a letter that we have a link for that gives you a sample that you can fill in the blanks. You can copy and paste it, fill in the blanks, edit it, for your child, but it puts in the laws and some of those logistics that you might not know. But that's a good way to do it. Any request you make, put in writing. So I have heard a decent amount of people, I asked my, school, I had a conversation, at the front desk, and they just told me, we'll keep an eye on it. Or I talked to the teacher, we'll keep an eye on it. Well, if you just have a conversation, nothing's documented. There's no regulation that goes, that actually attaches to a conversation. Technically, you asked the question, but it's not tracked anywhere. And so when it comes to asking a school, you do have to have a concern with the child's education relating to your concern with autism. If you just have concerns your child has autism, you need to go to the medical provider. And an educational diagnosis is different than a medical diagnosis. So regardless, if you have concerns your child has autism or intellectual disability, go talk to their doctor too. You need to have a full formal assessment. But as far as the school goes, if they have indicators of a certain disability and it's affecting their school, then that's what you're putting in your request for the assessment is, my child, I want my child to be assessed for potential special education services. I, see signs of autism, which are A, B, and C. It's been reported from the teachers that this is impacting my child's education. Maybe give an example of a report or two. Because of this, I'd like for them to be assessed for potential special education services and include, an assessment for autism. And the school is doing an education based autism evaluation. It's just covering the pieces of autism that impact school.
Love it. Thank you, Vinaya. Okay, so I think we have another comment here. What's going on? Francis has a parent tip. Let's read it real quick. Parents, if you feel your child needs another service, you as the parent have the right to request an assessment directly. Once you sign an assessment plan, the school has 60 days to complete it. This does not require an IEP team decision to start. You can initiate it yourself. Example, if your child's getting OT or speech outside of school, you can request an assessment to see if they may also qualify for these supports within the school. And then, unfortunately, we cannot see the rest of the comments. Sorry, Francis.
No problem. And that's true. You can always request for those assessments to be completed. That's the piece where those, yes, once an assessment plan is signed, you have 60 days, the school does, to complete the assessment and hold an IEP meeting. They have, once you request the assessment, though, that's where that 1530 comes in. 15 days if they agree with you, or 30 days if they need to hold a meeting. So potentially, you have the 30 days after you request. They hold the IEP meeting. They agree to the assessment plan. If you sign the assessment plan that day and don't prolong, then they have another 60 days. So you're talking about 3 months.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where I always tell parents to expect. If it's done sooner, that's great. But it isn't common for assessments to be completed before the 60-day mark. You're real close to that 60-day almost always. The 30 days, a little wiggle room, but it's nice to know what to expect. And if from the day that you request until the day you have your decision, I always say count on it being 3 months. Part of the reason for counting on that is because you get into a lot of situations where parents are asking for things in April. The school year has been going, they're noticing these concerns, and they finally decide too much. I'm going to get it done before next school year. Maybe my child needs speech. April's actually too late. Because if the school takes 30 days, they need to hold a meeting. Now you're in May, and school gets out for most people beginning of June. So you're only 30 days into now the 60 days that they have. Those 60-day assessment timelines, they freeze anytime there is a school break of more than 5 days. So unless you're in year-round school, most schools, their winter break is a couple weeks. So at the start of winter break, timelines freeze, and they just start when school returns. Same goes for summer, which means the last day of school, if that is day 30 of your 60, then the first day back at school is day 31 of your 60. So if your intent for these things is to get something started at a certain time, always think 3 months. So if your intent is in January at the start of that new fresh semester to start a new service or get an aid by that point or whatever it is, you have to think a few months ahead of winter break, because winter breaks now you're cut off. So if you want January, you better have your request in September.
Love it. I think we have time for a couple more quick questions. Let me see here. I get this question a lot, Vinaya. Who is eligible for special education under federal and state law? And this question usually comes up when somebody is, I'd say I'd see this often where they have a child who is on the spectrum or has a diagnosis of something, and they're in a general education classroom, and they may have received an IEP or a 504, but the child's struggling. It's just not a great environment, and they've requested a one-to-one. They've requested special education, and the school's just not really accommodating. Schools will say, things are fine, we got it under control, or you need to find a new environment. We can't cater to this person, but they don't qualify for special education, whatever, right? So what would you provide as encouragement or thoughts on this process? Who is eligible for special education under both state and federal law, if that's something that a parent's considering as an option?
Yeah, so special education actually isn't just special day class. Special education is basically, if your child has an IEP, they have special education. So it doesn't matter if your child's in a special day class or if they're pulled out for a resource teacher or if there's a push in for something, that's considered special education. A special day class is a form of special education. So with who's eligible for special education, I sent over, I think Teresa's going to post a list. It's from Disability Rights of California of all the diagnoses that are eligible. And when you're looking at an IEP, an individualized education plan, The requirements for an IEP are that a child meets criteria for one of those diagnoses and they have a need for special education. So if a child doesn't have a need for special education, then they might meet criteria for the diagnosis, but they don't have an IEP because they don't have a need for special education. So it's kind of looking at that. And in that case, maybe they met criteria on the diagnosis and they need accommodations in class, but they don't need special education services, then that's a 504 plan. So it just depends on the individual needs of that student. If you want your student shifted from general education to a special day class, then they have to look at the appropriateness of that. Their schools are required to look at what is the least restrictive environment. And the least restrictive environment is the most time with typically developing peers in your school of residence. So whatever one you're assigned to, the idea behind that is that's the kids in your neighborhood. So creating an environment where, your kids get to go to school with the kids in their neighborhood, develop friendships in their neighborhood. That's where you're paying your taxes into, is that area. And going to your school of residence, that's one priority. The second priority is that piece of spending as much time in general education as possible. So if a child academically is able to access grade level curriculum, but maybe they have behavioral concerns or elopement, or they need transition, assistance, and they have rigidity and things, and, and so on and so forth, and that's what's keeping them from accessing their education, then that would be an appropriate time to ask for an potential aid for one-on-one services in general education. So most of it has to do with, especially once you get to academic years, so starting first, second grade, most of it has to do with that piece of, can they access the curriculum with accommodations, of course. Those can all be in place, but can they access it? If you have a student who is several years behind, then they're not appropriate once you get into those academic years for general education. And if you have a student who is above grade, and academically they're really strong, but they have all these behavioral concerns, then depending on your district, they might not have an appropriate special day class. And they're supposed to be looking at general education first with support. And schools do like to argue that a 1-to-1 aid is the most restrictive, but by definition, it's not. Because the least restrictive specifically specifies with those general education students is less restrictive than removing from that general education classroom and putting in a classroom with kids who all have also special needs.
Love it. Lightning round. Last question, Vinaya, and this does come from Miss MM. Can I request ABA services in school? My son already has a one-to-one aid, but I feel like she is not up for the task.
So you can request an RBT, one-on-one aid, a registered behavior technician. If you have a registered behavior technician as a one-to-one aid, they're overseen by an actual BCBA or a behavior technician. And that would be what you could request in school. They have to do, they'd have to look at the data. So what are the behaviors that are happening? I'm assuming that there's probably been a functional behavior assessment if you already have a one-to-one aid and there's behavioral concerns, but they would, if it's been a while, maybe they need new data or doing a new assessment, but looking at why you're requesting somebody that's more skilled and more trained. The other issue is they're difficult to find. So I unfortunately, have cases where we have to move up the ladder because even after you get one, the school quite literally can't find one. And that gets to be a really tricky spot to be in as well. So it's case by case. That would be another one where if you want to set up a phone consultation so we can talk about the details of why you think that somebody even more qualified is necessary, I can help you look over the data you already have and see if we can pull the information from the documents you have, or, if your school uses Class Dojo and the teacher's been emailing you, repeatedly because of behaviors. Anything that you can find in writing, we can put together a good case for why that would be needed if it's there.
Love it. Well, thank you, Vinaya. I really appreciate all of your answers and responses and time today, but we are, it's 1 o'clock. And I hear that Miss Myra will be joining you today. Not Myra Galt, everybody, but Myra on our team with Nicole, who speaks Spanish. She will be going live here in just a few minutes. So I have to let Vinaya go. Sorry, everybody. But thank you so much, Vinaya, for joining in today. And I really hope that you guys can take her up on her offer and reach out to our office if you want her to overlook your kiddo's paperwork and the data, like she said, to see if maybe there is some room to grow there for additional support, like having a BCBA on site, or more speech therapy, like we were talking with Ms. Kapoor. And so I know she'd love to chat with you guys. So please feel free to reach out to our office. All right, Vinaya, any last send-off words before we all head out today?
I don't think you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to come back anytime, and I'll try to go through the questions if there's any more that weren't answered today, and jot some comments down in on the questions on this live.
Sweet. I appreciate that. Well, thank you again, and thank you everybody for tuning in today, both on Facebook and on YouTube. Again, if you can share the stream or tag a friend who you feel might have a need for some of the information that Vinaya was able to share today, that would be great if you could do that. But with that said, thank you again for tuning in. I hope everybody has a wonderful Friday. If you speak Spanish, join Vinaya and Myra in a few minutes on our Spanish-speaking page here on Facebook and YouTube. And hopefully you can share that page as well in that stream. But yeah, with that said, everybody enjoy your Friday. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next time. Thanks again, Vinaya.
Thanks. Bye.